One of the practical use of research is to describe the data that we have. So in order for us to understand the nature of a research, we have to discuss first what are the characteristics of the tools that we are using. So for our research subject, we have this descriptive research for us to identify the characteristics of the clients or the respondents that we have for our research. So compared to other statistical tools, we have correlation study and experimental study. And now we have this descriptive research wherein we try to describe all of the characteristics of the respondents as well as their response to our what we call this, the research materials or tools that we will be using or the questionnaires that we have. So let us discuss the learning outcomes for this topic. So we have to describe the general characteristics and purposes of number one, or letter A, the observation studies, letter B, correlation research, as well as developmental designs and survey research. We also want to describe effective strategies you might use in each of these four research methodologies, which is later on, we will be discussing this one by one. We also want to identify the effective strategies for conducting a face-to-face, or we also have telephone or video conferencing interview, which is not also required for you to administer when you are conducting the project that I have given you. Of course, you will be using technologies such as Google Form or survey using this online platform, but we don't have this face-to-face interview or video conferencing interview to your respondents. We also have to identify effective strategies for constructing and administering questionnaire and for analyzing people's responses to it. Okay, we may also want to explain possible uses of checklists, rating scales, rubrics, computer software, and the internet in data collection. Okay, so in the past few meetings that we had, I also required you to understand your research tool or the questionnaire or the survey form that you will use to collect all the data that you needed for your research. And isa sa mga ano ninyo, sa mga tools ninyo are using rating scales or what we call the Likert scale. So we have to determine an appropriate sample for descriptive study, which will be discussed next week or next meeting. Okay, we also have to describe common sources of bias in descriptive research as well as strategies for minimizing the influences of such biases. Okay, so let's proceed with descriptive research designs. Okay, so descriptive research examines a situation as it is. It does not involve changing or modifying the situation under investigation. Hindi gaya ng experimental research. Ang descriptive study is more of identifying the natural occurrences as well as the observation that we have in a particular context. Okay? So this is how descriptive research goes. No? Hindi siya yung more of the cause and effect relationship. Okay? So it may also add up to some extent of explanation to this cause and effect relationship, which may be used in terms of the explaining the correlation of variable A to variable B, or one variable to another variable, for instance, in a experimental setting. However, this is not the main purpose of the descriptive research. Okay? So yung cause and effect relationship, it can be conducted through experimental research, but again, uh, descriptive research can explain further the occurrences right there in the context of this experimental design. So an observation study in quantitative research might be conducted with organisms such as plants rather than animals, or might be involved non-living objects such as rock formations, soil samples, or dynamic physical phenomena such as weather patterns, and some black holes or some astronomical occurrences. So a pilot study is essential for ironing out any wrinkles in identifying and clarifying behaviors or other characteristics under investigation. Kapag kayo ay merong observation study, you have to do a pilot testing. So let's say, for example, you have to draft first your first observation. So this is not the final report na ibibigay ninyo sa inyong professor or to your client na, halimbawa, you are doing this kind of research. So first, you have this pilot study. Okay? So embarking on full-fledged study without first pilot testing, the methodology can result in many hours of wasted time. Okay? Kaya tayo pinagpa-pilot study or pinagpa-pilot testing in order for us to understand the nature or the complex nature of the setting that we are trying to investigate. So, importante na malaman muna natin what are the initial observation within the context. Okay? Ano ba yung natural na behavior ng mga clients natin o kaya ng mga respondents natin in that certain place. Okay? So, we have to understand that kasi baka mamaya iba yung behavior nila doon sa konteksto nila, tapos we try to compare it to our own behavior when we are in that context. Baka kasi magkaiba yung ano natin, kaiba yung perspektiba natin kapag nandoon tayo sa ano na yan, sa situation na yan. So we try to understand first the nature of these phenomenon of these individuals that we're trying to observe. So when human beings are the topic of the study, the focus is usually a certain aspect of behaviors. Furthermore, the behavior is quantified in some way. Napag-usapan natin in the previous lessons that we have to try to understand the behavior in terms of quantifying the observable behaviors. Okay? Sa pamamagitan ng halimbawa, questionnaire, o kaya meron tayong guidelines or checklist na pwede nating i-quantify kung ano yung behavior na ipinapakita ng mga respondents natin. So in some situations, each occurrence of the behavior is counted. Okay? So binibilang natin bawat actions nila halimbawa. So we try to identify ano yung actions for this particular situation, ano yung behavior nila kapag ganito yung question natin. Okay, ano naman yung mga responses nila kapag ganito yung mga sinasagutan nila ng mga questions. Okay, we have to determine them for us to identify, or we have to quantify as well ano yung mga behavior occurring within the situation. Kaya nga pinapagamit tayo ng standardized test or standardized questionnaire. So the behavior is rated for accuracy, intensity, maturity, or some other dimension. Di ba nga kapag sa loob ng isang laro o kaya naman merong judges sa loob ng laro, di ba sa basketball halimbawa, meron silang tinatawag na rating scale. Binibilang nila kung ilan yung na-shoot na bola, ilan yung foul ng isang manlalaro, gaano karami yung naipasa niya na bola, okay, ilan yung na-assist niya, ilan yung na 3 points niya, ilan yung na-shot niya na na dun sa laro, okay, dun sa yung bola, okay. So this is one of the aspect of observation. So gaya ng nasa totoong buhay, diba, sa paglalaro ng basketball, the judges have to quantify ilan yung nagawa ng isang player. Kaya nga tinatawag natin na MVP, di ba? Kaya most valuable player siya. Kasi nabilang kung gaano karami yung na-assist niya, kung gaano karami yung na-shoot niya. Okay? So, halimbawa, sino yung mga naglalaro dito ng mga mobile games? Di ba kapag katapos ng ng laro ninyo, binibilang doon kung sino yung pinakamaraming, halimbawa, napatay na kalaban, o kaya naman sino yung pinakamaraming assist. Sino yung naglalaro ng Mobile Legends dito, halimbawa sa inyo? Meron ba? Meron halimbawa, sigurado yun. So, let's say for example, during the play, di ba binibilang doon kung ilan yung napatay ninyo, kung ilan yung assist ninyo. Halimbawa, kayo si Angela. Ano yung ginagawa ni Angela? Di ba? She is trying to boost yung kapangyarihan ng isang assassin. Di ba? So, kapag pumatong siya, halimbawa dun sa assassin, mas lumalakas yung assassin. Ngayon, mabibilang kung ilan yung assist ni Angela. Halimbawa, napatay nung sinakyan niya, yung dun sa kalaban. So, after the game, ano makikita ninyo? Di ba merong tally? Merong merong statistics, ilan yung napatay ng assassin na ito, ilan yung na-assist ng nito, ng tawag dito, ilan yung na-assist ng support na ito, o kaya naman ilan yung naging parte ng isang tank. Sino yung mahilig gumamit ng tanke dito? Yung tank, kumbaga kayong sumasalo ng mga kapangyarihan ng kalaban ninyo. Kayo sumasunod na lahat ng damage, okay? So, ang tawag sa inyo, halimbawa, ay wingman. Kasi, kayo yung nag-a-assist doon sa doon sa main character niyo, doon sa main hero niyo, halimbawa. So guys, sa observation study, we have to understand na importante din sa study to quantify ilan yung behavior nila, okay? Ilan yung sinabi nila na ganitong mga responses. Okay? Sa observation studies yan. So in observation studies, we have to define the behavior being studied in such precise, concrete manner that the behavior is easily recognized when it occurs. So divide the observation period in small segments. So pakunti-kunti, halimbawa, bibisita kayo sa isang area you are studying. Okay, sa isang araw. O kaya naman sa susunod na linggo. Ayan. O kaya sa susunod na month. Tingnan ninyo kung consistent yung behavior nila na yun. Sino dito yung kapag ka pumupunta sa isang bahay, inoobserbahan niya muna kung mabait yung mga nakatira. Tutuloy ba ako o hindi? O kaya naman, kapag maghahanap ako ng bahay, o kaya maghahanap ako ng apartment, o maghahanap ako ng trabaho, tinitingnan ko muna, ano kaya ang response sa akin ng gwardiya? Ano kaya ang trato nila sa kanilang mga employees? So, gaya ng pag-observe ninyo sa study, no, importante makita natin yung consistency ng behavior nila. Kaya siguro mabait sila sa akin ngayon kasi bago pa lang ako. Ngayon, habang tumatagal, mas naobserbahan ko na talagang mabait talaga sila o kaya mabuti yung pakikitungo nila sa akin. Okay? So this is a consistent behavior in a particular context. Halimbawa, kayo ay nagkakaroon ng observation sa loob ng inyong tinitirhan o kaya naman observation sa inyong pinagtatrabahuhan. Okay? So divide the observation into small segments and then record whether the behavior does or does not occur during each segment. Halimbawa, ngayong araw, ipinakita niya ba yung ganitong behavior? Ganitong araw, talaga bang ganito yung behavior niya? Kaya nga minsan kapag ka nagpapasurvey kayo, merong mga instances na yung mga respondents ninyo hindi sinasagutan ng maayos yung inyong mga questionnaire kasi isang beses lang ninyo ibinigay. Okay? O kaya naman, binigyan ninyo ng quiz. Halimbawa, yung isang klase ninyo. Tapos lahat sila matataas. So is this a true situation over the period of time? Halimbawa, sa buong semester, totoo ba ito? Baka mamaya, kaya mataas yung grade nila kasi nagpasahan sila ng mga sagot. Halimbawa, ganun. So, try to give another intervention. Halimbawa, pa-surprise quiz ka. Makikita mo, merong mataas, merong mababa, merong average lang. So this is how we try to qualify the reliable responses coming from our respondents. Okay, so each segment might be 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or whatever other time span is suitable for the behavior being observed. So use rating scale o yung Likert scale na sinasabi natin kanina na pwede ninyong gamitin sa inyong survey questionnaire. So the behavior in terms of a specific dimension, more about rating scales later in the chapter. Okay, so have 2 or 3 people rate the same behavior independently without knowledge of one another's ratings. Okay. So dito sa ano na to, sa rating scale na to, 'di ba kapag sa laban halimbawa ni Pacquiao, hindi isa lang yung nagre-rate nung laban nila. Halimbawa, ilan yung nasuntok ni Pacquiao o kaya ilan yung naibato niya na suntok. Okay? So hindi lang isa 'yon. Meron 3 halimbawa o kaya meron pa silang assistant na na nag-oobserba ng kanilang rating. Okay? So para consistent yung result ng inyong study o ng inyong observation, 2 or 3 people might rate the observation or the situation. Okay? So train the raters to use specific criteria when counting or evaluating the behavior and continue training until consistent ratings are obtained for any single occurrence of the behavior. Okay. So we also have correlation research. So correlation study examines the extent to which differences in one characteristic or variable are associated with differences in one or more characteristic or variables. Okay? So we try to understand the relationship between the 2 variables and then try to identify if this has consistency or relationship to one another. So the researcher might plot the data on a scatter plot, so also known as the scattergram, to allow a visual inspection of the relationship. So correlation exists if one variable increases, another variable either increases or decreases. Kapag ang variable A at variable B ay plinat natin sa isang scatter plot, na makikita natin, is it increasing? Okay. O kaya naman decreasing ba yung isang variable? So kapag pare silang increasing, this is a positive correlation. Kapag ano naman, yung isa naman ay negative, bumababa habang tumataas yung isa. So this is a negative correlation. So knowing the value of one variable then enables us to predict the value of other variable with one or some degree of accuracy. So graphs, graphical axis, the ordinate. So ito yung tinatawag natin na patayo. Okay? Kapag naman sinabi natin na horizontal axis o yung abscissa, ito yung sinasabi natin na yan, yung x-axis naman na sinasabi natin. So familiar ba kayo dito sa yung y and x-axis? So napag-aralan nyo ito sa may algebra. Yan. So ito yung ganito yung itsura niyang data natin kapag plinat natin siya sa isang scatter plot. Yan. Sa correlation between, halimbawa, yung age, may kinalaman ba yung pagtaas ng edad sa grade ng isang estudyante? Kung kayo, halimbawa, tatanungin ko, mas tumatalino ba ang tao kapag tumatanda siya? O kaya, mas nadadagdagan yung age niya? O kaya naman, mas nagiging maayos ba yung pagbabasa niya habang tumatanda siya? Kung kayo ang sasagot, ano ang response ninyo rito? Habang tumatanda ba, mas gumagaling magbasa o hindi? Depende. Okay, very good. So depende 'yon. So it's not a necessary it's not a predictor yung age na sinasabi natin doon sa reading comprehension o kaya doon sa grade ng isang estudyante pagdating sa reading capacity niya, di ba? So halimbawa, tumatanda ang isang tao, so hindi yun a predictor na siya ay magaling magbasa habang tumatanda siya. So this is also true with other factors. Halimbawa, mas matalino ba isang tao habang tumatanda siya? Pagka yung tinanong, sigurado sasabihin niyo siguro, depende. O kaya naman, sir, ano po, depende po sa ano po niya, sa skill po niya, o kaya po sa ano niya, sa knowledge po niya, kaya sa intelligence po niya. So, yun yung mga predictor na pwede nating explore furthermore. So, hindi lang age pala yung factor na makapagbigay sa atin ng clue kung ang isang tao ay tumataas yung reading comprehension niya o kaya yung grade niya sa reading. Tama? So, halimbawa, ganito, sinabi na ano na magaling sa math. Ayan, mataas yung grade niya sa math. Okay, math sa grade niya sa math. Tapos yung kanyang intelligence quotient o yung IQ niya. So maaari kapag tumataas yung grade niya sa math, mas tumataas din yung kanyang IQ kasi yung IQ, one of the factors is yung mathematical quotient, yung mathematical intelligence niya. Pero pag binigyan mo siya halimbawa ng English subject o kaya ng subject that has something to do with linguistic, maaring bumaba o kaya naman hindi ganun kataas yung kanyang performance. So, depende pa rin yun. Okay? So, the diagonal line right here, ito nakikita ninyong linya na ito, yung pataas na yan, through the middle of the dots, sometimes called the line of regression. Yan. So, dito pumupunta yung linya na yan, sa gitna na yan. Okay, so papansin niyo, papunta siya dun sa taas, pataas. Ito ay positive correlation na tinatawag. Kasi habang tumataas itong y-axis, tumataas din yung sa x-axis niya, naunawaan ba natin? Pero halimbawa, pababa itong ano na to, itong correlation na ito. Halimbawa, mataas, nasa 13. Halimbawa yung age niya, tapos pababa. So negative correlation naman yan sa ano, sa relationship nila. Okay, mataas yung age tapos pababa yung reading grade level, maaring ito ay sinasabi natin na negative correlation. So reflects hypothetical perfect correlation between age and reading level. If all the dots fell on this line, kung perfecto lahat, itong mga linya, itong mga dots na yan ay nandito sa gitna, yan, yung gitnang linya na yan, ay sinasabi natin na perfect correlation. Kaso, meron tayong kaso. Merong mga dots na hindi kabilang doon sa gitnang linya. Anong ibig sabihin nito? Ito yung sinasabi natin na depende po. Baka mamaya itong mga respondent na ito, iba yung age nila. O di ba? Makikita niyo eh. So age, halimbawa, grade 6, age nila ay 6 years old. 6 years old. Tapos, andito lang sila sa reading grade level na 1 o kaya naman mataas na siguro baka nasa 1.5 gano'n. O kaya naman habang tumataas yung age nila, halimbawa nasa age 13 sila or 12, nasan sila halimbawa? Nandito sila banda sa bandang 5 or 6. Yan. So mapapansin niyo na meron silang diferensya sa isa't isa. Okay? So if all the dots fell on this line, a child's age would tell us exactly what the child's reading level is. In actuality, only 4 dots, the solid black ones, fall on the line. So data were to include only children of ages 6 and 7. We would have greater homogeneity with respect to reading ability than would be the case for a sample of children ages 6 through 13. Totoo nga naman kapag halimbawa, pinili natin ages 6 to 7, maaaring mas makikita natin yung relationship dito sa plot na ito. Yan. Pero ang respondent kasi natin, masyadong kalat. So 6 years old to 13, hindi natin masabi kung ano ba yung training nila, ano ba yung mga napag-aralan na nila. So we can plot this data more consistently doon sa regression line na sinasabi natin. So second, we can describe the degree to which the two variables are intercorrelated, perhaps by computing a statistic known as a correlation coefficient. So that any predictions of children's future reading abilities based on age alone will be imprecise once tested. Okay, so a caution about interpreting correlational study. Again, the data may not lie, but the causal conclusions we draw from the data may at times be highly suspect. Again, this be an evidence kapag tayo ay nagko-conclude sa isang relationship. However, this is not a mere evidence para mag-conclude tayo na ito talaga ang dahilan para masabi natin na mataas yung performance ng estudyante. Maaring meron pang ibang factors kung bakit ang isang bata ay mataas ang reading comprehension o kaya naman sa reading ability niya. Okay? So ideally, a good researcher isn't content. Hindi siya makokontento sa isang investigation lamang. Hindi siya titigil doon at a correlational relationship because beneath the correlation may lie some potentially interesting dynamics. So one way to explore those dynamics is through structural equation modeling or SEM. Okay, kung kayo ang tatanungin ko, ano pa ang maaaring maging dahilan para tumaas ang isang ability ng isang estudyante o ng isang respondent sa kanyang reading comprehension? Okay? Para tumaas yung score niya doon. Diba, sabihin natin na 6 years old or 7 years old siya, pero ang level niya ay pang 13 years old. Ano kaya yung maaaring dahilan kung bakit ganun yung performance niya? Okay, maaaring maging outlier siya doon sa group. So, ang average halimbawa ng reading level nila ay nasa 5 or 6. Pero itong sinasabi natin na gifted na individual, maaaring pang level 13 na siya o pang level 10 na siya halimbawa. Okay? So, what could be the cause of this one? So, maaari, itong bata na ito is gifted. Ibig sabihin, meron siyang characteristic or intelligence that is higher than the average of his colleagues o kaya naman average of his classmates. Mas mataas siya dun sa performance na yun. So this is another reason why is that there are some individuals perform better o kaya naman higher than the average. Okay, one that can yield more solid conclusions about cause and effect relationship is to follow up a correlation study with one or more of the experimental studies. Yeah. So correlation does not in and of itself indicate causation. Kapag tayo ay nag-conduct ng correlation study, hindi ibig sabihin nito, ito ang dahilan kung bakit ito ang kanyang performance. Okay? So maybe this is just an explanation of that factor. So, punta naman tayo sa mga developmental designs. Okay? So, developmental designs, we have cross-sectional study. People from several different age groups are sampled and compared. Okay? Meron tayong specific na grupo ng age na iniimbestigahan. So for instance, a developmental psychologist might study the nature of friendship for children at ages 4, 8, 12, and 16. Okay? So meron siyang specific group of individuals based on age lamang. So ang tawag dito ay cross-sectional study. Halimbawa, a gerontologist might investigate how retired people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s tend to spend their leisure time. Again, this is a cross-sectional study. Kapag kasi sinabi naman natin na longitudinal study, this is a single group of people is followed over the course of several months or years and data related to the characteristics under investigation are collected at various times. Halimbawa, grupo ng mga elementary students, alamin nila kung consistent yung personality nila. Extroverted ba sila or introverted by this time? Okay, so halimbawa, they conducted this study for their extroversion and introversion this time, 2021. 2021, okay? 2021, tapos magko-conduct ulit sila ng another personality assessment for the next 10 years. So ito yung sinasabi natin na longitudinal study. So for example, psychologists might examine how children's spoken language changes between 6 months. Okay? Pwede naman yun. Halimbawa, after 6 months, you try to assess again the characteristic of these individuals and 5 years of age. So, or an educational psychologist might get measures of academic achievement and social adjustment. Okay? So, halimbawa kayo, tinanong kayo, ano yung mga nakuha ninyong achievement ng elementary? Sir, nung grade 1 po ako, meron po akong honor po nung grade 1 po ako. Halimbawa po ako, ano po ako, first honor po ako. So, after 10 years, yan, nakakuha ka pa rin kaya ng mga honor. Yan, Latin honor ka pa rin ba? O kaya naman, ano ka pa rin ba? Meron ka pa rin bang mga recognition coming from the school that you are in? Okay, so consistently, you are gaining this reward kasi ito yung characteristic mo talaga ever since nung kabataan mo. Okay? Halimbawa, ako naman, nabigyan ako ng most industrious tawag dito, award nung ano ko, nung elementary ako. So pag sinabi nating industrious, ibig sabihin masipag. Hanggang ngayon ba masipag pa rin ba ako? Okay? In what measures? Okay? So ano yung mga characteristic nyo halimbawa na consistent over time? Sir, ako po, simula po nung pagkabata po ako, mahilig po talaga akong kumanta. Hanggang ngayon po, kumakanta pa rin po ako. Sige nga, kayo nga. Ano yung mga characteristic ninyo na consistent over time? Sir, ako po, madalas po ako magpatawa ng mga classmate ko po nung elementary po ako. Hanggang ngayon po, parang ako po yung sinasabi nila na clown of the class. Okay? So possible this could be subject for longitudinal study. Okay? So longitudinal study tries to understand the consistency of the behavior or characteristic of an individual through time. Okay? So meron naman tayong cohort sequential study, likely the combination of both longitudinal and cross-sectional designs. To address some of the weaknesses of longitudinal and cross-sectional designs, researchers occasionally combine both approaches. So in what we know, the cohort sequential study. So in particular, a researcher begins with 2 or more age groups. Okay, this is a cross-sectional piece and follows each group over a period of time. So pinag-aaralan muna nila grupo ng mga respondents nila, and after some time, yan, they try to reassess the characteristics of these individuals. So like longitudinal study, a cohort sequential study enables us to calculate correlations between measures taken at 2 different time periods, and therefore to make predictions across time. Now let's proceed with survey research. So survey research involves acquiring information about one or more groups of people. So perhaps about their characteristics, opinions, attitudes, or previous experiences. So yan yung ginagamit natin yung mga survey research natin. So by asking them questions and tabulating their answers, the ultimate goal is to learn about a large population by surveying a sample of the population. So, halimbawa nga, nung naglalabasan yung mga resulta ng mga survey, sino ang iboboto ninyo na presidente? So, lumalabas halimbawa sa mga poll nila, si ganitong politiko ang iboboto kong presidente. Okay, iboboto ng madla na presidente. Siya yung mataas sa poll. Okay, halimbawa, mag-poll tayo halimbawa sa klase natin. Kung kayo, sino ang iboboto ninyo na presidente? Kung na kayo ay nasa edad na ng tamang pagboto, sino ang iboboto ninyo na presidente? Sige nga, mag-poll nga tayo dito. So this is a survey research, halimbawa, na nagtatanong-tanong tayo o magamit tayo ng mga questionnaires for us to understand the pulse of the public. Okay? So this is a survey research. So in the survey research, interviews tend to be standardized, that is, everyone is asked the same set of questions. Hindi pwedeng iba-iba yung instructions ninyo. Hindi pwedeng iba-iba yung sinasabi ninyo or mode of communication to other people unless otherwise it is a standardized tool. Halimbawa, meron kayong standardized interview using English language. O kaya naman, meron kayong standardized script or survey questionnaire pagdating doon sa Tagalog o kaya sa Filipino language. Okay? So in a structured interview, the researcher asks certain questions and nothing more. So compared to semi-structured interview, the semi-structured interview, the researcher may follow the standard questions with one or more individually tailored questions to get clarification or probe a person's reasoning. So merong mga follow-up question kapag sinasabi natin na semi-structured interview. Pero, again, there is a structured questions or merong standardized question that we have to ask the respondents. Okay. So we also have face-to-face interviews have distinct advantage of enabling a researcher to establish rapport with potential participants and therefore gain their cooperation. Okay. Thus, such interviews yield the highest response rates, the percentages of people agreeing to participate in survey research. Okay. So sabi nila, mas effective daw itong sinasabi natin na face-to-face interview. Yung nakikita talaga natin yung mismong respondent. Unlike, magbibigay tayo ng questionnaire in random o kaya magpo-post tayo ng mga questionnaire natin online. So, mas mataas yung ating response rate gamit itong face-to-face. Kasi, mas nakikita natin kung willing ba sumagot ng questionnaire o kaya ng mga questions yung mga respondents natin. Okay. Now, we also have questionnaires. So, we use paper and pencil questionnaire. This can be distributed to a large number of people, including those who live at faraway locations, potentially saving a researcher travel expenses and lengthy long-distance telephone calls. Okay? So meron tayong mga questionnaires online, pwede natin gamitin yung mga technologies na ito for us to disseminate as well as to collect all of these responses that they have. So yet questionnaires have their drawbacks as well. Ano yung mga limitation kapag tayo ay gumagamit ng questionnaire? So for instance, when questions are distributed by mail or email, the majority of people who receive questionnaires don't return them. So, okay. So halimbawa, nagbigay kayo ng mga papel o kaya ng mga questionnaire, yung iba hindi na sinusoli. Yung iba tinatago na lang o kaya yung iba tinatapon yung mga survey questionnaire natin. So this is another limitation. Kapag tayo gumamit ng pen, paper, questionnaire. Yung iba kapag kasabi mo, sir, babalikan ko po yung questionnaire ko po. Yung iba tinatapon o kaya yung iba kinakalimutan. Meron ka palang pinapasagutan. So likely, in order for us to avoid this situation na masasayang yung ating resources, yan, tinapon. O magkano ang photocopy halimbawa, sabihin natin 50 cents kada page. O magkano din yun. So unlike using technology gaya ng Google Form, so likely kuryente lang yung yung puhunan mo. So balikan mo kung meron na nag-respond o wala pa. So in other words, there may be a low return rate. Ibig sabihin, mababa yung pagsasauli sa'yo ng mga responses nila. And the people who do return them aren't necessarily representative of the originally selected sample. Yun yung mas masama. Sinagutan pero hinulaan. Sinagutan pero hindi naman talaga sila yung hinahanap mong mga respondent o kaya hindi talaga sila yung inaasahan mo na dapat sasagot ng questionnaire mo. Halimbawa, ang target respondent mo ay mga ages 7 to 10 years old. Okay? So, halimbawa, kailangan mo pa ng dito, ng consent ng magulang. Tapos, ang sumagot halimbawa ng questionnaire mo ay yung mismong magulang. Okay? So, problema mo yun na baka mamaya, yung mga response nila is not the representative of your target respondent. Okay? So make sure to qualify well kung sino yung sasagot ng inyong mga questionnaires. Okay? So practical applications tayo using checklist, rating scales, and rubric. So checklist is a list of behaviors or characteristic for which a researcher is looking. Okay, halimbawa, sumasagot kayo ng mga questionnaire o kaya ng mga form. Ito yung chine-checkan ninyo. Okay, halimbawa, single, married, or separated. So ilalagay nyo, i-checkan nyo halimbawa, di ba, yung single. So the researcher or in many studies, each participant simply indicates whether each item on the list is observed, present, or true, or in contrast, is not observed, present, or true. So, saan pa natin nakikita halimbawa yung checklist? So, every time that we go to marketplace, o kaya naman every time na we go to mall, di ba meron tayong checklist na sinasagutan kung doon sa COVID form, tracking form, di ba? So, meron ba kayong simptomas? Ilalagay nyo halimbawa doon, no, no, puro no, kasi wala naman talaga kayong simptomas halimbawa. O kaya naman, pumunta ka ba sa lugar na merong COVID? O kaya naman, kung meron ka bang kasama sa bahay ninyo na merong COVID? O ganyan. O kaya naman, ikaw ba ay merong pinuntahan na party o kaya naman gathering? So ilalagay mo halimbawa, no, kung hindi ka pumunta sa ganung gathering. So this is a type of question wherein you have to check if it is applicable or not. Yan. Halimbawa, kung ikaw ay taga Pateros, checkan ang blanco na linya na ito. So this is a form wherein you have to indicate if this characteristic is present or not. True or false na ganyan. So rating scale naman, so this is likely referred to us by a form called Likert scale. So meron tayong mga characteristic, halimbawa, inadequate to excellent, never to always, strongly disapprove to strongly disapprove. O kaya strongly disagree to strongly agree. Ganyan. O kaya naman 1 to 7. So 1 being represented by strongly disagree, 7 represented as strongly agree. Okay? So this is what we call the rating scale. Gaano kalakas yung ating tawag dito, ang ating response to this particular item or agreement to this particular item. Okay, so this is an example of rating scale. Alright, so we have strongly approved to strongly disapprove. So especially when researchers rather than participants are evaluating certain behaviors, we use rubric. Or perhaps when they are evaluating certain products that participants have created, a more explicit alternative is a rubric. Okay, so ito yung ginagamit halimbawa ng mga teachers ninyo in order for them to grade your recitation. So meron kayong halimbawa na pinasa na na mga requirements ninyo or essay. So they use rubric to understand better how to grade a certain criteria or to grade certain parts of your product or output. So yeah, typically a rubric includes 2 or more rating scales for assessing different aspects of participants' performance. So let's say for example right here, we have the characteristics at the right side. So halimbawa, meron kayong correct punctuation and capitalization. Meron kayong ganitong characteristic. And then, at the right side, okay, so left side itong mga characteristics. And then sa right side ninyo, meron kayong levels. So meron tayong proficient, meron tayong in progress, meron tayong beginning to develop. So meron tayong rate on how a correct punctuation and capitalization, for instance, can be graded, okay, or represented by an output of the student. So proficient ba ang kanyang pagsusulat? O kaya naman, medyo kailangan ba ng improvement? O kaya naman, this product is likely incorrect. O kaya naman yung output niya makes many punctuation and capitalization errors. Masyado marami yung error. So likely you will be graded beginning to develop. Okay, some rubrics have grades, halimbawa no. Sa proficient halimbawa, ang nakalagay doon is 1 to 1.5. O kaya naman sa in progress 1.6 to 2.0. Tapos beginning to develop halimbawa 2.1 to 3. So pwedeng ganun yung grading or depending on how you would grade a output. Halimbawa, sa proficient, 100 to 95. Pwedeng ganon. So, in progress, halimbawa, 94 to 90. O kaya naman, beginning to develop, 89 to 75. Pwedeng ganyan. So, now let's proceed with practical application or planning, conducting interviews in quantitative study. So in planning and conducting interviews in a quantitative study, we have to limit the questions to those that will directly or indirectly help you answer your research questions. You have to also write the interview questions, consider how you can quantify the responses and modify the questions accordingly. Okay, we also have to restrict each question to a single idea. Hindi natin pwede pagsama-samahin yung idea in a question. So, halimbawa, you are referring to extraversion characteristic. Stick ka lang doon sa extraversion. Huwag ka na magdagdag ng iba pang mga factor na baka marito yung sasagot doon sa question mo. Okay? So, restrict each question to a single idea only. We have to consider asking a few questions that will elicit qualitative information. Consider how you might use a computer to streamline the process. Okay? Mas pasisimplihin natin gamit yung mga technologies existing. And we also have to pilot test the questions. Courteously introduce yourself to potential participants and explain general purpose of the study. We also have get written permission. So ito importante. Kailangan manghihingi muna tayo ng permission to an institution or respondents of our research. So save controversial questions for the latter part of the interview. Kasi baka mamaya kapag ka nagtanong kayo ng mga sensitive na questions, hindi nasagutan yan ng mga respondents ninyo. Okay? So if you have follow-up questions that has something to do with personal level o kaya naman controversial questions that may include within your study, so you may indicate the section for further responses ng inyong mga respondents. Halimbawa, for follow-up questions, we may contact you with these email address or contact number. Please provide the said information for us to invite you to another session of interview or questions. Okay? Follow-up questions. Pwedeng ganun. So you will notify the respondents kung meron pa kayong mga follow-up questions related to the topic. Pwede naman ganun. So hindi siya ma-open kapag dinirektan yung pasagutan yung question na yun. Especially, it is written. O kaya naman merong pangalan niya. Okay? So you have to clarify first information when necessary. In terms of constructing and administering questionnaire, we have to keep it short, keep the respondent's task simple and concrete, provide straightforward, specific instructions, use simple, clear, unambiguous. Ibig sabihin, hindi dapat malabo yung inyong mga instructions, language, or the use of words that you are using. So kapag kayong instructions ninyo ay naiintindihan ninyo, yan. So likely this is a good indicator that you can that your respondents can also likely understand your instructions. So dapat naiintindihan nyo rin kung ano yung instructions ninyo bago ninyo ibigay sa kanila. So number 5, give a rationale for any items whose purpose may be unclear. So check for unwarranted assumptions implicit in your questions. Word your questions in ways that don't give clues about preferred or more desirable responses. So determine in advance how you will code the responses. So again, when you have this observation or studies that really require coding, so perhaps you have to make a preparation prior to collecting the data. Yeah. So dapat kung meron kayong coding, make sure you have a backup plan before going to this situation. So mas mabilis yung proseso natin kapag ganyan na meron kayong ready na tool when you are conducting observation or study in terms of this descriptive study. Okay, we also have to check for consistency, conduct one or more pilot tests to determine the validity of your questionnaire, scrutinize the almost final product one more time to check sure it addresses your needs. You also have to make the questionnaire attractive, and professional looking. Okay, sa paggamit naman ng technology and to facilitate the questionnaire, administration and data analysis, again, we have to check when participants are in the same location that you are, have them respond to the questionnaire directly on a laptop or tablet. But for now, pwede naman kayong gumamit ng link for your Google form na pwede ninyong i-post or ipasa sa mga target respondents niyo. So when participants are at diverse locations, use email to request participation and obtain participants' responses. If you use paper mail delivery rather than email, use a word processing program to personalize your correspondence. And last two, you use the scanner to facilitate data tabulation and use computer database to keep track of who has responded or who has not. Yan. So kapag kayo ay meron ng mga responses coming from your respondents, pwede kayong gumamit ng Google Drive. So you just have to click this questionnaire that you have, and then a table will be provided to you by your survey questionnaire. So for the guidelines, we have to maximize to return the rate of the questionnaire. So consider the timing. So halimbawa, ang target respondent ninyo is mga estudyante, tapos midterm week nila o kaya kasagsagan ng midterm nila. Huwag kayong magpapasagot ng ganung oras siguro. After a midterm o kaya naman prior sa midterm week nila, makapagbigay na kagad kayo ng questionnaire. So make a good first impression. Okay, so dapat magalang kayo kapag kayo ay manghihingi ng mga responses nila. Okay? So instructions must be clear. Nauunawaan dapat kung ano yung mga gusto ninyo malaman sa kanila. So motivate potential respondents. Ang ginagawa ng iba, nagpaparaffle sila o kaya naman nagbibigay sila ng mga freebie o kaya naman may pa-Gcash sila halimbawa for them to give after the data collection. So motivate potential respondents. So if mailing your questionnaire, include a self-address envelope with return postage kung kayo ay gagamit ng manual mail. But of course, with the use of technology now, so you can just indicate your email address provided in your survey questionnaire. So if you have questions, you may reach us to this email address or this contact number. Pwede ninyong ilagay kagad doon sa inyong instructions. For further clarification, you may contact us through, so ilagay ninyo kung yung email address ninyo. Offer results of your study. So be gently persistent. Dapat nagpa-follow up kayo sa kanila pero in a good manner pa rin. So for the next meeting, we have this topic, choosing a sample in a descriptive study. So this concludes our discussion for descriptive research.